Oh, I just touched it and it's on. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead. Open up into your notes. We'll pick up where we left off. Okay. This is going to be notes associated with the Mao years, and then we'll be playing the Mao years. I'm not sure if we'll get to that today because there's a lot of things we haven't covered in that time period, 1961, or 1960 to 1976, when Mao dies. Boom. He dies in 1976. Anybody know who takes over for China mostly after Mao is gone? That's right, Deng Xiaoping. Does anyone see any pictures of Deng Xiaoping in this room? Really? Yep, right there. Because oftentimes I'll walk back to that corner. The image that I picked up when I went on my first tour with students overseas was to China. I picked that up. I'm like, that's cool. That's like a Deng, silk screen. And it's got Mao in the middle. It's got Zhou Enlai on the far left. Behind Mao and next to Zhou Enlai is Liu Shaoxi. And I think that's not Peng Dehuai back there, but it's another general behind Deng Xiaoping and Mao. So it's another well-regarded general. Look who's not in that picture. Mao is in the picture. He's in the middle. Zhou Enlai is on the far left. These are going to be people that Deng's like, okay, Mao is, you can't see, China cannot yet say Mao is a complete wreck. If you're going to get anything from anybody, you're going to be like, his economic plans weren't so good. Okay? Liu Shaoxi is in there. He's in the back. Right? Liu Shaoxi, if you look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Liu Shaoxi is number 2. He's in the back row. Lin Biao is not there. And who else is not there? You're making up some name, Ashton. Don't just start making Chinese-sounding sounds. Deng Xiaoping is in the image there. He's in charge when that image was made. Jiang Xing, Mrs. Mao.
Why were you expecting us to say that?
I don't know. I thought, maybe. Do you see a woman in the picture up there? Well, there's a reason there's no woman in the picture. Because Jiang Xing, when we get to the end of this, actually you're going to learn this today. Because, you ready? Write this down. You ready? Ashton, write this down. Julian, I need your cooperation. Write this down. Jiang Xing is going to want to have dead Deng Xiaoping and Liu Shaoxi. Is she going to be able to get some of those guys dead? Yeah. Liu Shaoxi is going to end up dead, so we're going to be telling that story as we go through. Who ultimately is going to be put in prison and die in prison after Mao dies? His widow, Jiang Xing. And who's going to make sure that she ends up there? Deng Xiaoping. If you get into a knife fight, which is kind of what this is going to end up being, you've got radicals on the one side, you've got not-so-radicals, among communists, not-so-radicals. It's going to get pretty wild. And who is in the strongest position overall? Mao. I mean, even when Mao retires, he's not retired. Okay? So last time we saw that Mao went into retirement. Liu Shaoxi, Deng Xiaoping, Zhou Enlai started to stop what really not well thought out economic program did they start to sort of let's put that aside. It's really great if you know this. You can leap through your notes if you can't really find it. Keep leaping forward through your notes. There's the answer, the great leap forward, okay? How many people, Tara, how many people died? Because we got this actually from before. How many people died during the Great Leap Forward? This idea to make China like a super industrial country? 30 million, yeah. Because it was wrong. I mean, it's let's take all that grain to help invest in industrial advancements and so forth. They took too much grain. They were promised too much grain. I mean, it's how many of you guys would be, I don't know, give up a month of receiving gifts in order for the betterment of your family's economic situation? Would you go home today and say, I don't want any gifts this month. It will be better for my family if I don't. You're very kind and generous. Now, why would this month in particular maybe perhaps one that you might not want to necessarily give up as a gift-receiving month? And raise your hand if you are anticipating receiving any gifts. If you just give me a used candy cane, I'll be happy. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's nasty. But, I mean, were the peasants, or at least, I shouldn't say the peasants, some of the peasants were, but were local communist leaders of communes promising more than they could deliver? Yes, and was the government taking what the promises were based on? And were people starving as a result? Yes, okay. So now, we set that aside. Mao goes into retirement, but now Mao comes back. Yay! Yay, she says. Yay, Lin Biao helped that, right? He compiled quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. Okay? And I was like, I'm going to do this. Let's get everybody involved. Okay? In fact, we're going to get the young people involved. The young people weren't there. I mean, it's always weird. It's kind of like if you were born in 1949 when the People's Republic of China was started, how old would you be by, let's say, I don't know, the summer of 1966? Because that's when things really kick into gear. Yeah, you'd be like 17. So it's kind of like, what happened 17 years ago? You guys are 17, 18 years of age. What happened 17 years ago? Let me think. 17 years ago, that would be like 2003. No, he wasn't. Not yet. He was elected in 2008. So, I mean, like, when you were born, Bush was president in his first term. I mean, when do you... Your earliest recollections of a president would be with George W. Bush. But, I mean, when Obama became president, you were still very young. And I'm like, I was born during Kennedy's time, and I don't remember anything about Kennedy being president. I don't even really remember much about Johnson being president. I do remember Nixon, and everyone since then. So here's the deal. Make sure you write this down. A lot of young people don't have memories of that time period. And what have they learned about Mao? He's great, he's amazing, he's like a god. And so when Mao says to you, write this down, Mao says to the young people, it is time for you to join in the great proletarian cultural revolution. You're like, yeah, Mao's asking me to do something. What does he want me to do? In the fall of 1966, you don't go to school. I mean, it's not because of COVID or anything like that. It's like, we got something different planned for you. This is like a gap year. Although you don't know that it's just a gap year. It's like Mao is going to have you participate in the Cultural Revolution. Okay? Yes?
I don't want to interrupt, but we already did this.
I know, we're recapping.
Okay.
It's okay. Part of this is to kind of recap, and I know that sometimes people, I do this. I kind of like pick up and pick it up, and so then when we get to the point where you're actually writing new notes and so forth, you're like, okay, good. Right? Because sometimes people, not you, but some people start to tune it down near the end of the period. Right? They don't necessarily always get things. So there is value in doing that. All right, so, in fact, let's recap. Who did Mao look at within the party as not necessarily being with him, being as radical as he was? Julian, tell me.
Some of the top communist officials.
Okay, specifically.
Liu Shaoqi.
Very good, and well pronounced too. Liu Shaoqi got demoted from like the number 2 guy to what?
8.
Very good.
And he put Lin Biao at number 2.
Lin Biao moves up. So Lin Biao's like Mr. Radical, and he's going to be there. And then Deng Xiaoping got reduced to number 6, okay? And they're hoping that they're not going to fall any further. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping and Li Shaoqi, not very good at all. Not very good at all. Okay, so here we go. And of course, Zhou Enlai is sort of like, oh my gosh, this doesn't look very good. People like Zhou Enlai, but he's like, is he going to be able to stop Mao? Is anyone ever able to stop Mao when Mao wants something new? Here's the new slogan. Ready? This is new. It's right to rebel. Mao is encouraging people to rebel. He's encouraging young people to rebel. Rodrigo, against who? Well, and that could be anybody. But top officials, yeah. And those top officials are going to be like among the top officials in the country, but also top officials in the local communes and villages and so forth. They're going to be under attack too. And then the old groups of people that are constantly under attack. If you happen to be a capitalist, if you happen to have ties to the old regime, if you happen to be, you know, a former landlord, you're going to be in trouble. Okay? Here we go. Here we go. Students get to form up into groups called Red Guard units. Red Guard units. You'll see this in the video. Red Guard units. So this is going to be the groups of students who are going to go out into the countryside. They're going to go out in cities and so forth. And they're going to do the Cultural Revolution. Red Guard units. It's not made very clear in the video initially, but it's kind of like, how many of you guys do you suppose, if you were living in Mao's China at the time, would be eligible for a Red Guard unit membership? Would you all? Mostly, you get a sense it's among the better students. Write that down. It's among the better students. So there's a little bit of a qualification thing. It's kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, everyone's equal, but some are more equal than others. So we're going to like organize these Red Guard units. So if you're not like in a Red Guard unit and you're a young student and so forth, do you want to participate? Yeah, let's go ahead and identify these guys right now. They're going to form up into their own units. And they're going to be called the Rebels. Okay? They're going to call themselves the Rebels. And they're going to say, we're also fighting for Mao. You're like, great. So we got two student groups that are fighting for the ideas of Mao Zedong. Does that sound cool? What do you suppose the colors of each of those groups would be? Red, yeah, I'm like red. Are they going to have problems or rivalries or anything like that? Yes, eventually they're going to be fighting each other in the streets with guns. From the military, because the military is going to get involved too. Let's go through this a little bit more, and you can see this is going to turn into like this really crazy thing. I mean, who can stop people, young people with military, with guns shooting at each other in the streets of Shanghai and Beijing? Is there one person that can stop all the crazy chaos? Mao, yeah. When's he going to stop it? That's going to be July of 1968. Okay? So for about 2 years, so think of them as sort of like the gap years, 2 years. The Cultural Revolution is going to be really on fire with a lot of young people involved spreading Mao Zedong thought, reading their books, doing their little daily, almost like prayer, worshipful, thing for Mao. Do the Mao loyalty dance. And go find some bad people to go struggle with. Yeah. Liu Shaoxi. Deng got moved to number 6, and Liu really dropped quite a bit to number 8. Yeah. It's kind of a general sense. I mean, it really sucks. It means kind of like Liu's like, well, I'm number 8. Why are you struggling with me? That's going to happen in this as we go through here.
So if they were spreading words with Mao, and Mao doesn't contradict himself, but they're spreading, like, say they spread the mass campaigns again, and they start doing that whole weird stuff, like criticize officials.
That's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's going to happen in here. Yeah, struggle meetings are going to take on a whole different level of intensity during the Cultural Revolution, especially during those first 2 years of it. All right, so here's what they're doing. Instead of going to school, they're going to go out into the countryside to gain revolutionary experience. You got that? I mean, this is wild. I mean, you can imagine a president of the United States or something, if the president had all the power, basically saying to a large population, hey, it's time to grab your guns. And in America, because we have guns, I mean, they don't have guns so much. Well, the military has guns. It's time to go spread a revolution in the country. What would you think of if a president said, hey, let's go have a revolution in the country. Let's bring back the spirit of 1776. Let's go find some British tax collectors and tar and feather them. Really? Really? What role are you going to play? I don't know. Are you going to, heat the tar up, or are you going to receive the tar? You'll be the feather person. Who wants to play the role of the British tax collector? Oh my gosh. Anyway, so they don't go to school, they sing songs, they spread Mao Zedong thought, and you're like, what does this mean? So this is going to be August 18th, 1966. You'll see it. That was the first time that Mao actually reappeared in public, because he'd been kind of out for a while. I mean, he had the video of him, swimming in the Yangtze River going, hey, I'm healthy. Look at my backstroke. I'm in good shape now. I'm ready to move. Okay? And so it really hits a peak on October 1st, 1966. So that late summer and into the early fall, that's when things are really coalescing. October 1st is National Day. That's the day that they celebrate the creation of the People's Republic of China. So it's kind of like our July 4th. October 1st, yeah. So October 1st, 1966, Mao appears in public at Tiananmen Square, the big open square in this capital city of Beijing, and all these people are waving their red book, and they're just like so excited. They're going to spread some Mao Zedong thought. And who are the recipients of that? Well, some of the recipients that the Red Guard units are going to be looking for are people that still might have Western ideas, because Western ideas are bad. Okay, hold on. Wait for it. Western ideas are bad. So anybody that happens to have anything in their house that has to do with Western ideas, that's bad. Or if you have anything to do with like the old, like Republic of China, that's bad. Here is a specific target. You ready? The four olds. This is kind of scary if you're like part of the four olds. Ideas, culture, customs, habits. Okay? The four olds. Ideas, culture, customs, habits. So basically anything that like people practiced that wasn't communism that happened to still sort of be continuing on. I don't know, like ancestor reverence, museums that had like stockpiles of things, from the history of China, religion. What was like what it was like that one of the top religions in China? Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So what these guys would do is they would go rummaging around here, there, and everywhere and attack these places. I remember going to China. It was fascinating. In 2000, when you go to countries, you want to like go look in their museums and see all the really cool artifacts and so forth. In a lot of Chinese museums, like they didn't have that stuff. I mean, they still had the Great Wall of China. Red Guard units aren't going to be able to destroy the Great Wall of China. But they went into museum after museum after museum and just destroyed stuff. Okay? Buddhist stuff, anything historical having to do with the old empires, destroyed. There was one, I remember, there was this cool story. This one museum we went to on that trip in 2000, we saw this beautiful jade Buddha. It's probably about that big. I mean, that would have been a target for the Red Guard units. And it was in the museum. And it was in the museum during the Cultural Revolution. And the Red Guard units were on their way to the museum, and the museum curator was like, uh-oh, Red Guard units are coming, quick. He put the Buddha in a box and put on top of it like a statue of Mao Zedong. That worked. They were not going to disturb the statue, and so they're like, well, we don't have anything here. Let's move on. That was clever. Didn't always work out that way for people that were trying to protect stuff. What they did is they changed the names of street signs. They gave them like new signs, like radical names of signs. They would go looting homes. If anyone had anything, they would just go after them. When they went out to the countryside, guess who was ready for them? The peasants who had grievances against local officials, including some of those same local officials who had set those Great Leap Forward target goals. Remember the ones that said, hey, we're going to contribute this much, and then when they did, local peasants were starving to death. Oh, it's payback time. There is going to be revenge against some of those local officials, because can you go after local officials? Red Guard units can go after local officials. So you're going to get some peasants who are like, man, it's going to be payback time. And what happens to some of those local officials when they have struggle meetings led by these Red Guard units, encouraged by local peasants? Yeah, a lot of them are going to end up dead, okay? And in fact, you'll see this, and they'll talk about this. If they're having a struggle meeting, and they've got like, what they have is like, they'll put like, sometimes they'll even put a cap on them. Their faces are always going to be pointed down. They'll often put like a really heavy sign, like a heavy signboard with some kind of a thing, and it's just going to like cut into their neck as they're bowed down and they're getting ripped on and ripped on and ripped on and ripped on. And it's interesting because after a while, you know that that person is going to get the full implementation of the struggle meeting if they put a big red X on your sign. That means at the end of all the chewing out that you're going to receive, you're going to end up dead. How many people? Dead? 400,000 people, at least. And a lot of them, of course, are communists. Some of them, like you'll hear this one gal talk about how, I think I mentioned this last time, they're like, oh, let's go after the old capitalist. The granddaughter and her classmates go struggle with the old capitalist. And they don't just chew him out verbally. They beat him until he's dead, lying on the street. And this one gal, she talks about it. It's like fascinating, these testimonies that people have. She's like, we got there late. And I always wonder, if I had been there at the same time that my classmates were struggling with him and killing him, would I have been participating? That's pretty intense. They would go around and beat up hooligans and loose women. And you hear this one guy going, you know, how do we know if they're like anti-Mao? Can you tell that in their face? Have you ever wondered about that? Like when you see a portrait of someone, are they a criminal? Do they have criminal intent and so forth? Oh my gosh! Do we determine whether people should be sent to justice and jail and so forth on the basis of facial stuff? Are these Red Guard units actually capable of handling and observing and evaluating evidence of wrongdoing? Sometimes they would go, you know, if a person denies it, what does that mean? They don't want to be in trouble. But then they would just beat them even more. This one guy's talking about how he would just go around and beat loose women. You know, what the heck? Yeah, I mean, in this country, if somebody accuses you of doing something wrong and something is going to happen to you, where is that going to be like handled? In court. Thank you. Not as a result of some gang that goes around and hangs outside of your house and threatens you and abuses you until you do what they want. Mao said this. It's a long quote, but essentially I'll paraphrase it. A revolution is not a dinner party. So Mao is okay with all this. He's like, I want a revolution, and there's going to be some difficulty along the way. Some people are going to get killed. Thanks, Mao. Within the government itself, by 1967, right, who is in the strongest position, who's like saying to Mao, you go, this is good, yay revolution, yay radical. Then Biao and Jiang Xing. That's when Jiang Xing really is at kind of like the peak of her influence in those beginning in the Cultural Revolution and in the years leading right up until Mao's death. Okay? This is going to be there. As we go into 1967, here is one, they target Liu Shaoxi. I mean, Liu Shaoxi's, and he went from number 2 to number 8, and he's like, man, I could go below that if I'm not careful. Because who's going after him? Jiang Xing. And what is Jiang Xing doing? Well, I mean, what do you have to do to go after one of your rivals within the Communist Party elite? You try to get the crowd going. Man, if you're a Red Guard unit and you're like, wow, we get to go struggle with Liu Shaoxi. Where the heck is Liu Shaoxi? I tell you, Liu Shaoxi is not going out into the public. He's hanging out. Remember the elite communist headquarters, like family areas and so forth? That was in Zhongnanhai. And so that's like a secluded area and so forth. And so the Red Guard units are like, hey, get out here, get out here. Liu Shaoxi's not coming out, but his wife did. They lied to her. They told her that her kid had had an injury at school. I don't think her kid should have been going to school out away from the home at that point in time. That was too dangerous. She listened to the lie. She was grabbed by the crowd, and they had this massive, massive struggle meeting with her. They dressed her up like a whore, and they struggled with her.
Wait, so they actually was she actually sending her kid to school, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that may have been the first mistake. They tricked her into coming out. They grabbed her. They struggled with her. This is April 1967. And as a result of being labeled as a whore, dressed up as a whore, and struggled with and so forth, being the wife of Liu Shaoxi, She ends up with 12 years in jail. Liu Shaoxi is, well, going to be struggled with. You'll see the videos of that. I mean, here he is, it's like this top Chinese communist official, and they are in his face. He's going to end up being under 2 years of house arrest and ultimately in prison, and he's going to die in prison. That's Liu Shaoxi. He dead as a result of the Cultural Revolution. Now, get this next one. You ready? Deng Xiaoping. Is Jiang Xing going to go after Deng Xiaoping as well? Heck yeah. I mean, there's going to be a quote here. They'll actually translate. You'll hear her voice, and unless you speak Chinese, you don't know what she's saying, but it's translated into something along the lines of, Deng Xiaoping should die the death of 1,000 cuts, or something like that. She wants Deng Xiaoping dead, too. Deng Xiaoping will be, and I think actually Deng Xiaoping's son almost died as a result of some struggle meetings and so forth. Deng is going to be exiled within the country. Okay, so he's going to be sent out into the countryside. He will survive. Make a note of this. Does Deng like it when young people participate in government, in mass participation? No! Has he had some experience of young people participating in mass demonstrations and so forth? Yes, during the Cultural Revolution of the late 1960s. And it nearly killed him. Just kind of tuck that away in your head, because later on when Deng's in charge, and Deng's bringing in capitalism and so forth and trying to, cross the river by feeling the stones, do it bit by bit, not too crazy. But inevitably, some people are like, hey, it's not working out for me. Other people are doing better than me. Oh, by the way, can we have some, democracy? And in 1988, there'll be student protests at Tiananmen Square, and they'll be there for, 6 weeks. And it's kind of chaotic, and a lot of students are saying this, that, and so forth. And Deng ultimately is like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of this chaos. I know how to get this thing done. What does he do to end the student protest? In 1988, he sends in the military. Yeah, he sends in the military. They clear the square. Some people die. Yeah, but so if you wonder, wow, Deng is really tough on those young people. Sometimes you go through an experience. I don't know. How many of you guys like big dogs? There you go. How many of you guys had a bad experience with a big dog when you were little? Okay, so sometimes people react badly or a certain way to dogs if they have had a bad experience at an earlier age. Deng had some bad experiences with crowds of young people in the late 1960s. It nearly killed him. Yes, Ashton. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mao's wife. Okay. Mm-hmm. No. You're getting the wives mixed up. It's the wife of Liu Shaoxi is the one who will be struggled with. Yep. Oh, yeah, sorry. Jiang Xing will die in prison, but that's after Mao dies. That's when Deng Xiaoping comes into power. And Deng Xiaoping looks at Jiang Xing and goes, payback's a bear, lady. So when we get to the end of Mao, when Mao finally dies, and then who's going to come into power? Deng Xiaoping will come into power. Who is going to lose all influence because her husband is no longer? It's going to be Jiang Xing. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. It's after Mao kind of mellows out a little bit. Okay? Yeah, it'll take a couple of years. All right, here we go. Okay, so let's see. Oh, 1967. This is when I referenced this before. 1967 is when you're going to see the streets experience in the big cities factional warfare between what two groups? Red Guard units and the rebels. Two groups of different young people, all claiming to be the leaders in the revolution for Mao. The rebels actually overthrow the Communist Party in Shanghai. And guess who's encouraging them? Jiang Xing, Lin Biao, and Mao. It's like, whoa, they've actually overthrown the Shanghai Party. And they're moving their more radical members of the Communist Party into higher and higher positions. Do you got that? I mean, it's crazy. I think in this country there's a lot of internal strife and so forth, and competition within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party. They don't always agree with each other. I mean, they disagree with the opposite side on a lot of stuff. But man, in the Communist Party, the only party, this internal disagreement is deadly. So what finally gets Mao to go, okay, we need to calm things down a bit? Street fighting with weapons from the People's Liberation Army, because they're like, hey, you want our weapons? Because we're going to support you. Fill in the blank. Rebels or Red Guards. They're shooting at each other from the tops of buildings and so forth. I mean, it's crazy. So finally, Mao eventually even sees that this is just a little bit too much. You can wait for it. All you have to do is just wait a certain amount of time, and Mao will change his mind. This is too chaotic. You're like, you start. Don't anyone tell him that he started it. But who's going to end it? He will. July 1968. In July 1968, Mao says, Red Guard units, rebel units, it's time to go home. It's time to go back to class. So ostensibly, that fall, in 1968, the students, under orders from Mao, now go back to class. Is that going to be it? No. Because the leaders of the rebel units and the Red Guard units are going to be identified, I love the name of this, by so-called dictatorship teams. I mean, that's not subtle. And they go into the classrooms where the students are listening to their lectures or working on their stuff, and the dictatorship teams, they know who they're looking for. They're looking for the previous leaders of these rebel and Red Guard units, and they go and they take them into custody. And they're like, you need a special re-education program that is not going to be accomplished here in the classroom. They're lucky that they actually don't get killed right on the spot. Write this down. Lots and lots of young people are going to be re-educated. In the fall of 1968, lots of young people, particularly in the cities, are going to be re-educated, and Mao is basically going to say, you know where the best education comes from? Have you ever heard like older people talking? It's like, you know what, if you guys had the same kind of resources that we did and so forth. Well, Mao was raised as a peasant, and he loved his peasant upbringing. He's like, there's so many good things. So this is what he did to lots of city youth. He sent them out for 1, 2, sometimes even more years in villages out in the countryside. Off you go. Out into the countryside. Now, of course, he didn't actually ask permission from the villagers to look after these guys. So when these city slickers initially show up, these young city types, and they're in the village, I mean, are they going to be much use for like farming and other kinds of? No, and the villagers are like, oh my gosh, there's just more mouths to feed. So, but eventually, they'll train them up to do good, hard farm work. And then eventually maybe they'll come back and live and maybe resume their education. It was fascinating because when I was in China in 2000, our tour guide, really interesting guy, he talked about how his parents were both sent for re-education during this time period. They were like young professors and so forth, and they were sent to be re-educated. No provision whatsoever was given to like what was going to happen to this guy and his younger brother. They were just left in the house, and it was like Home Alone for like several years. And they were in charge, just doing their own sort of thing. He says that his own personal education had a bit of a gap because who's there to make sure he showed up at school and did homework and so forth? Nobody. I mean, it was just weird, yeah.
Okay, so for some clarification, so these dictatorship teams, they were formed by
They're going to be organized by the party. The party has returned in the sense that, if you got radicals in the party and they're going to look and go, okay, now we got it. Okay, we don't need the big massive groups of young people running around the streets shooting each other. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of mild when you compare to like, struggle meetings or getting sent to a camp where it's going to be even harder. Yeah, to be just sent out onto like, another gap here where you're working out in the farmlands. it's mild by comparison. Okay? Meanwhile, 1969. The Cultural Revolution is not over. It's just going into a different kind of a phase. 1969, you have the Ninth Party Congress. They meet, I want to say, like every 5 years or so. You have this big sort of gathering of the communist officials from around. And this Ninth Party Congress, is dominated by the radicals. Okay? So Jiang Xing and Lin Biao and so forth. I mean, things have sort of settled down a little bit. You're not having street fighting. You're not having like roving bands of young people, Red Guards and rebels, going around threatening everybody. But nevertheless, it's still quite radical. And it will be quite radical all the way up until Mao is gone. Okay? You still have to watch out. You got to watch your back, Deng Xiaoping. You got to watch your back, Zhou Enlai, because Jiang Xing and Lin Biao could be out to get you. In fact, write this down. Lin, in 1969 at the Ninth Party Congress, Lin is appointed as a successor. And Lin Biao says in his speech, he criticizes harshly the United States of America. Well, hello. I mean, who hasn't? He also is criticizing the Soviet Union. And we've seen that the Soviet Union and China have been at odds ever since like the early 60s. Okay? But Mao starts to think a little differently about global relations. Write this down. This is very important. Okay? Mao starts to see the Soviets as a greater threat to China than the United States. Mao's having a little bit of a change of thought on this. And Zhou Enlai is actually supporting him on this. So now we see a little bit of a difference, a little bit of separation between Mao and Lin Biao. Mao, follow this, write this down. Ultimately, Mao is going to be open to a visit to China by President Nixon in 1972. Lin Biao is not excited about that. And if you disagree with Mao on a critical issue of foreign policy, where does that put you? Here's what was said by the government. Lin Biao tried to commit an overthrow of the government and tried to overthrow Mao. I don't know that he could actually really even try to pull that off. And Lin Biao got on an airplane. And Lin Biao's airplane crashed over Mongolia in September of 1971. Trying to escape? Yeah, exactly, crashed. Basically, Mao's like, Lin Biao, you're like disagreeing with me, you're dead. Fanaticism is going to reduce a bit more from that point on. Yes?
Wait, so did the pilot just say, okay, it's time to
It's
go?
one of these things where it's like, it's not like, remember the Mexican Revolution where like the governor kicked the guy out of the country and then they could have pushed him out of the airplane, but they landed in, so he lived in Texas. I suppose if they wanted to be more sympathetic to the pilots and they wanted to get rid of Lin Biao, they would have pushed him out of the airplane. I mean, I feel bad for the pilots because I think what happened was the pilots got killed along with Lin Biao. That's it's a way of getting rid of him. I think he maybe was trying to escape the country because he saw that it wasn't going to work out very well for him. Yeah, September 1971. So, yeah. Did we do the loyalty dance thing about how people had to report their thoughts to Mao twice a day and dance the loyalty dance? So that was still going on. Yeah. 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 So Lin Biao's gone, but Jiang Xing's still there. You still got to watch your back. So we'll develop a little bit more. We got a little bit more in the notes as far as this. We'll do those tomorrow, and then we'll start the second half of the Mao years. So you'll be able to see all that crazy stuff that I was talking about. Okay? So we got through most of the notes for this last part of it. Very good. Yeah. Yeah, wait till you see the video. Did you get all that, Landon?